When big business does leftist government bidding, that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Go back in time to the coronavirus years, right, when everything was locked down and people were told to stay home from work, stay off the streets, stay out of church, stay out of school, wear face masks. If one face mask was good, two were better. By logical extension, why not wear 9 face masks then? Told to stop singing in the few churches that did remain open, told to not congregate in groups larger than 6, larger than 8, larger than 12, whatever was the number of the day, whatever, say, college campus administrators deemed dangerous for that particular campus at that particular moment in time. Go back to that time and think of the number of laws that were passed shutting down America, the untold numbers, the dozens upon dozens, the hundreds of laws that gave government the right to shut down everything in America, to stop the economic engine of America, to stop children from going to school, to stop you and I from taking, say, a morning run on the beach or an afternoon stroll in the park with our little kids, right? All those laws that were passed, think of them. Yes, it's a short thought process because, of course, there weren't any, right? There weren't any laws passed saying you must wear a face mask as a condition of entering Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart or Walgreens or CVS. I think there was maybe one small jurisdiction in Massachusetts that actually did pass a face mask mandate in their local government. But by and large, aside from that, the laws in America were never changed to force people to take these actions. Everything was done by an emergency order, right? An emergency health order issued at the federal level that trickled down into the states and localities as bureaucratic dictates onto the people, seizing individual liberties left and right, right and left, up and down and up, right? It was a time in America where we all got a taste of what tyranny is like, right? What it's like to live under a dictatorship, under tyranny. And so hopefully we've learned our lesson from that, and never again will we allow a government bureaucrat like Anthony Fauci to issue recommendations that he knew full well would be carried out as policy dictates, issuing these recommendations, all the while saying, I'm not political. I have nothing to do with the political decisions. I'm just the friendly guidance, the friendly doctor guidance at the federal level. And yet, when states like Florida or South Dakota did not immediately hop to and jump to attention and put into place recommended lockdowns and face masking and so forth in their respective states, Anthony Fauci would then jump to the media and talk about the numbers of people who would die, who would very likely die because of these decisions of these terrible, terrible Republicans. Anyhow, that was a time of tyranny in America, and hopefully we've learned to never again listen to a government bureaucrat issuing one day this, one day that, and expecting us all to stand down on our liberties, on our individual God-given freedoms in order to comply with his ever-changing agendas. What happens when government does the same thing, bypasses the legislative process to bring about wills and agendas in other areas of culture and society and constitutional concerns in America? Say, gun control, right? Democrats are very clever at issuing gun control rules and dictates and agendas and orders and regulations and controls while calling them all common sense, gun controls, common sense, Second Amendment reforms, or safety provisions. We just saw that crazy New Mexico governor trying to seize the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, abiding legal carriers by issuing, under a public health emergency, no less. Violence, she said, was a public health emergency because people had recently died, children had died by gunshots in her state. She called out a public health emergency and said because of the violence in her state, she was putting a stop to legal carrying for a period of 30 days because something had to be done. People had to be saved. So that was an extreme. That was so extreme, you even saw leftists, normally gun-controlling leftists, say, hey, hold the phone on that. You can't do that. And their problem was not so much with the gun control agenda. The problem they saw was with using the public health emergency to enact this gun control agenda. So it's sort of splitting hairs. They would love the idea of seizing guns from all Americans. They just didn't want to do it under the public health emergency order. So that's the extreme. But what happens when Democrats work with others in America, other groups, to bring about gun control reforms that they know dang well they cannot get passed through the legislative process, right? I'm talking about when Democrats in Congress or in the White House work with businesses around America to make it very, very difficult to purchase, sell, possess, or even buy ammo for weapons, for legal firearms. So if you're above the age of 18 or 21 in your state and you're allowed to purchase and own a handgun legally, these businesses make it really difficult for you to purchase a handgun because they go after the businesses that sell the handguns, or they make it really difficult for you to purchase ammo for your handgun because they go after the businesses that make ammo. California just brought about this first statewide gun and ammunition tax in the country, right? So what happens in California gets pushed out by Democrats across the rest of the nation. So expect more of this, right? Then you have President Joe Biden establishing, and I'm reading from whitehouse.gov, first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, to be overseen by Vice President Kamala Harris. Wow, there's a double whammy, right? The Commission of Gun Violence Prevention, overseen by the Vice President Kamala Harris. What is the mission of this new office? Again, reading from whitehouse.gov, new office will focus on implementing executive and legislative action, including historic bipartisan Safer Communities Act signed by President Biden to end the scourge of gun violence in America. Look, if Democrats are really interested in ending the scourge of gun violence in America, they would talk about the roots of gun violence in America, which is not the inanimate objects themselves called guns and firearms. It's the hearts and minds of those who actually pull the trigger on these guns, right? I mean, these guns don't fire by themselves. Somebody has to pull them. And so it's the hearts and minds of those who commit acts of violence and crime that we need to concern ourselves with if we want to change behaviors. And so look at things like broken homes in America. Look at things like fatherless homes in America and the statistics behind that. How children raised in homes without fathers have a higher percentage, have a higher likelihood of doing poorly in school, dropping out of school, engaging in risky behaviors like drug addictions and alcoholism, ending up in prison, becoming members of gangs and so forth. Look at things like that as leading and fueling gun violence in America. Look at things like the open borders and how the cartels exploit our open borders, right? drug running and trafficking and gang members flowing across our borders, certainly with little regard for laws that we already have in place prohibiting illegals and prohibiting criminals and prohibiting those with violent past from possessing or purchasing weapons, right? We already have gun controls in America that make it illegal to use firearms to murder somebody, to kidnap somebody, to hold up stores, to commit acts of robbery, violence, and so forth. We have laws against that. It's not the illegal carriers out there. It's not the law-abiding Americans who are committing these acts of gun-related violence in America. We already know that. That's common sense. So Democrats know this too. And that's why they know they can't use Congress, they can't use the legislative route to pass their Second Amendment clampdowns. So they have to look elsewhere. And where they have been looking for years now is at business, right? They go after the businesses that do business with firearm manufacturers or firearm dealers or firearm purchasers even. They go after the business and make it very difficult for law-abiding American citizens to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And thankfully, we do have some people on Capitol Hill who are aware to these sneaky snake Democrats, right? And they use their positions not to seize individual liberties from Americans, but actually to do some good, to uphold rights like the Second Amendment, which is not for hunting, by the way. It's for self-defense. It's for defense of self and family, including defense against an overburdensome government, right? So they use their political positions to actually do some good for law-abiding American citizens and fight these leftists who would love to bypass Congress and usher in a time where the Second Amendment does not exist, but in a way, in a manner, where they never have to be held accountable for it, where they never have to take a public vote. So they get to hold their office, they get to pretend, hands off, hands off. I didn't bring about this policy, like Anthony Fauci. I didn't bring about policy. I'm not in politics. They get to pretend they had nothing to do with it. And meanwhile, they've had everything to do with it. These groups use things like big business to go after law-abiding American citizens, and that's a dangerous path for America to walk. And my guest today, Senator Ted Cruz, his office has discovered a very dangerous agenda that the left has been trying to push, using business to seize away Second Amendment rights from law-abiding Americans. Thank you, Senator Ted Cruz, for being on Bold and Blunt. It is great to have you here.
Cheryl, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So Democrats, with their sneaky ways, have found a way on gun control that you and your staff have discovered that has flown really under the radar. Can you tell what happened, what you guys found?
Well, sure. Back in March of this year, a Texas company that manufactures small firearm parts contacted my office and told them that Intuit had canceled their subscription with QuickBooks payroll services. So this Texas company used QuickBooks to service their payroll, to cut their paychecks to their employees, and they went to cut the paychecks. They submitted the payroll, and they got notified that their account had been terminated for no reason. And when the Texas company contacted my office, I am the ranking member on the Senate Committee of Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And so I opened an investigation from the Commerce Committee into what Intuit was doing and why they were targeting a firearms manufacturer. It turns out, as the investigation proceeded, that we discovered Intuit said they had been pressured into cutting off firearms manufacturers and firearms sellers by two large banks, by J.P. Morgan and Bank of America. And we discovered that what they had done to this Texas company, they had done to over 100 different companies, either firearms manufacturers or sellers of firearms. And as the investigation proceeded, Intuit realized that they were going to be coming under a whole lot more scrutiny if they continue doing that. And so the good news is they reverse course, and so they're now providing payroll services again. They're not discriminating against lawful businesses in pursuit of a political agenda.
But what of the other companies? Because certainly J.P. Morgan, Bank of America have grander designs with this type.
Sure.
Yeah. So what are you guys looking at in regards to that?
This is a persistent problem. We saw several years ago, we saw two giant banks, Bank of America and Citigroup, both try to use their economic power to effectively coerce gun control laws. And so Citigroup announced that it would cut off banking services to any company unless they refused to sell firearms to anyone under the age of 21. It is perfectly legal under federal law for people who are 18 or 19 or 20 to purchase a firearm, to exercise their Second Amendment rights, to defend their home, their children, their families, and yet Citigroup decided they didn't like that. Likewise, Bank of America announced that they were going to cut off banking services to any retailer that sold so-called assault weapons. Likewise, these weapons that are called assault weapons are entirely legal under federal law, and yet Bank of America wanted to coerce retailers into banning them. At the time, I sent letters to the CEOs of both of the banks. I brought in the senior leadership of Bank of America to my office, and I got to tell you, it was really quite striking. As I was sitting there with their senior leadership, I asked the woman who had written the policy, I asked her, I said, okay, so you are banning assault weapons. Tell me, what is an assault weapon? And she had no idea. She did not know. She said, a machine gun? And I told her, well, no, machine guns have been functionally illegal for more than 80 years. And it really is stunning that you're trying to ban something, but you don't even know what the hell it is you're trying to ban. And I pointed out to both of the banks that they had, not too long ago, both gotten billions of dollars of federal taxpayer money coming out of the great financial crisis. And yet, apparently, they're utilizing those resources to try to undermine the Second Amendment rights of 30 million Texans and Americans across the country. They continue to abuse their power, and this is a persistent problem. This is a problem we're seeing throughout big business, of woke big business. It's a problem we're seeing of woke banks, and it is a real threat as the left is more and more weaponizing economic power.
So was your reference to a few years ago to actually Operation Choke Point, brought under the Department of Justice under Barack Obama? And whether it was or not, I thought we've already been through this and it ended in lawsuits.
Well, we have. So Operation Choke Point was something different than what I was referring to. So what Bank of America and Citigroup did was they did it unilaterally. It was not from the government. It was rather just abusing their own economic power. Operation Choke Point was something that the Obama administration did, again targeting gun sellers and using their regulatory power to go after them. And you're right, there were multiple congressional hearings. There were lawsuits that came out of it. I think there is considerable concern that the Biden administration is going to do likewise. At this point, that evidentiary record hasn't been fully developed, and so that is a concern I have and many others have in Congress, but it is not clear as we sit here today that the Biden administration is repeating those particular abuses.
And if you go back even farther in time to the Bill Clinton era, we saw housing and urban development, I believe, being used to try and seize away individual gun rights from those who had housing that was funded in part by tax dollars. Do you remember that as well? That's going back a ways.
You know, I do, and I've got in November a new book coming out that is entitled Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. And in the book, I examine each of the institutions that the radical left has seized and corrupted. And so it takes a look at K through 12 education, it takes a look at universities, it takes a look at big tech and entertainment and sports and science, and it looks directly at big business. And so it walks through, for example, the meeting I had with Bank of America. That is recounted in the book, and it lays out strategies that have been effective in pushing back on the abuse of power by the extreme left in big business. But we've got a real problem in that so many major organs of our society have been seized by the radical left that we need focused, concerted effort to press back to defend not just our individual liberties, but our constitutional rights.
Again, what's the title of the book? Because when you say it includes strategies that have successfully worked, I think Americans need some of that right now.
I very much agree. The book is entitled Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America.
Wow.
And it's available on pre-order right now. It will be released in early November. And so each chapter focuses on, all right, what are the steps that have been most successful so far in fighting back against the woke takeover of these institutions, and what else do we need to do?
So you must be watching with concern the creation within the White House of this new commission to counteract gun violence in America, especially when you see that Kamala Harris has been put in charge of it. Where do you see this going?
Well, unfortunately, we have a pattern in this administration of weaponizing the federal government to target their political enemies. And we have seen the Department of Justice thoroughly politicized. We've seen the FBI thoroughly politicized. We've seen all of law enforcement. We've seen the IRS and the intelligence community politicized and weaponized to target their enemies. And when it comes to free speech, this is a White House that is eager to censor you and to censor me and to censor anyone who does not repeat exactly what they want us to say. And it's a threat to free speech that is greater than any level we've ever seen, and it's particularly exacerbated by the eagerness of big tech, of Silicon Valley, to get in bed with the Biden White House and to facilitate the active censorship of free speech. And I think the synergies and the active collusion between big tech and the Biden administration, that together poses the single greatest threat to free speech our country's ever seen.
And then you said, talking about Silicon Valley, then you see Governor Gavin Newsom signing into law this first of its ever kind extra taxation on purchases of ammo and guns and so forth. The feds, I guess, already put like 10, 11% tax on such purchases. Now California is imposing another 11%. Do you see other states picking this up and running with it?
Look, the radical left wants to take away our constitutional rights. When it comes to the Second Amendment, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Gavin Newsom, and most congressional Democrats want to take away your right to keep and bear arms. You know, before I was in the Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and all the state and federal appellate courts. And I was incredibly proud when I was SG of Texas to have litigated the case of Heller versus District of Columbia. That is the landmark Second Amendment case at the U.S. Supreme Court, where I represented Texas and 30 other states defending the individual right to keep and bear arms, and the Supreme Court rightly ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms. Today's Democrat Party hates that decision, hates the Second Amendment, and their objective is to disarm law-abiding citizens. And so I expect these legislative efforts in blue states to get worse and worse and worse.
Thank you very much for your time. I know you have to run to a vote, but it's great to chat with you. And thank you for your defense of American principles.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Cheryl.
Bye. The book, one more time, Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America, available for pre-order now by Senator Ted Cruz. If you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, at Real Life Network, and, of course, wherever podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.